My name is Skylar. I'm 26 years old, and right now I'm standing in the freezing rain, staring at my front tire, which has been intentionally slashed. Behind me, on the dry lit porch of the house I've called home my entire life, stands my mother, Susan. She isn't offering me an umbrella. She isn't asking if I'm okay. Instead, her face is twisted in a sneer as she screams at the top of her lungs, "You're an ungrateful, worthless servant, Skylar. You think you can just leave? Look at you! You can't even get out of the driveway!" My father, Harold, stands behind her, his arms crossed, nodding in silent agreement. They didn't just puncture my tire. They punctured my spirit. For years, I've been the invisible daughter. I was the one who cooked the meals, scrubbed the floors, and did the laundry while my younger sister, Madison, lived like royalty. Just this morning, they threw a massive send-off party for her because she's going on a month-long luxury trip to Europe with her friends, a trip my parents paid for using the money they claimed they didn't have for my college tuition. When I landed a life-changing job interview this morning, I thought it was my ticket out of this hell. But they couldn't let their maid leave. They needed me here to take care of the house while Madison is sipping lattes in Paris. So Harold took a screwdriver to my tire. As the rain soaks through my thin jacket, I look at my single suitcase sitting in the mud. Susan shouts again, "Get back inside and start the dishes. You aren't going anywhere. You live under our roof. You follow our rules." I don't cry. I don't argue. The time for begging for their love ended the moment I heard that hiss of air leaving my tire. I simply reach into my pocket and feel the cold metal of my car keys and something else, a small, laminated card given to me by my late grandmother, Eleanor. They think they are the masters of this house. They think they've trapped me. But as I pick up my suitcase and start walking down the driveway, leaving the car behind, I realize they've made the biggest mistake of their lives. They think they just kicked out a servant, but they don't realize they just evicted the person who actually owns every single brick of this mansion. The next time I stand on this porch, I won't be carrying a suitcase. I'll be carrying an eviction notice. Before I tell you how my grandmother's secret gift turned my parents' world into a pile of ashes, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you've ever felt like the invisible child in your family, or if you've ever been treated like a burden by the people who were supposed to love you most, drop a comment below. Let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. Your stories matter, and trust me, you are not alone. This story gets much more intense, so stay with me until the very end. To understand why I was standing in the rain with a suitcase and a flat tire, you have to understand the dynamic of the house at 742 Silver Oak Lane. On paper, we were the perfect American family. A beautiful mansion, a manicured lawn, and 2 daughters. But inside those walls, there were 2 different worlds. One was bathed in gold, and the other was covered in dust. My sister, Madison, is 2 years younger than me. In my parents' eyes, she is a literal angel who can do no wrong. From the moment she was born, I stopped being a daughter and started being a helper. It started small. Madison got the brand new bedroom set while I got the creaky hand-me-downs from an attic. Madison got the designer labels for school, and I was told to be practical with thrift store finds. But as we grew, the gap between us became a canyon. The favoritism wasn't just about toys or clothes, it was about our very value as human beings. I remember when Madison turned 16, my parents threw a party that cost more than most people's annual salary. They bought her a brand new white Jeep Wrangler, wrapped in a giant red bow. I remember standing on the porch, watching her scream with joy, while my mother whispered in my ear, "Skylar, go inside and make sure the catering trays are refilled. Don't let the guests see you looking so sullen." When I turned 16, I got a happy birthday text and a list of chores because my parents were too busy planning Madison's upcoming cheerleading banquet. I didn't get a car. I didn't even get a cake. I spent my 16th birthday scrubbing the grout in the guest bathroom because Susan said it looked shabby for her friends who were coming over later. Then came college. This was the moment I realized they truly didn't care if I succeeded or failed. My father, Harold, told me point blank, "Skylar, the economy is tough. We've had to make some hard choices. We have to prioritize Madison's education because she has so much potential. Potential? I asked, my voice trembling. I'm the one with the 4.0 GPA. Madison is barely passing. Don't be jealous. It's unbecoming, my mother snapped. So Madison went to a private university with a $60,000 a year tuition, fully funded by my parents. They paid for her sorority fees, her spring break trips to Cabo, and her study sessions that usually involved high-end shopping sprees. Meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs: tutoring, waitressing, and cleaning offices at night, just to put myself through the local community college. I slept 4 hours a night, and when I came home, I wasn't greeted with a "How was your day?" I was greeted with a pile of Madison's dirty laundry and a sink full of dishes. But the real kicker? The rent. After I graduated, I moved back home to save money for a deposit on my own place. My parents didn't offer me a room out of love. They charged me $800 a month for my childhood bedroom. They told me it was to teach me responsibility. Meanwhile, Madison graduated and moved into a luxury apartment in the city, which my parents paid for, along with her car insurance and her lifestyle expenses. For 3 years, I paid them $800 every single month. That's nearly $30,000. I thought I was helping my parents with the mortgage. I thought the house was struggling financially because of Madison's expenses. I felt guilty for even thinking about leaving because Susan would constantly moan about how tight things are and how we all have to pitch in to keep this roof over our heads. I was the invisible pillar holding that house up. I was the one who noticed the leak in the roof and spent my weekend fixing it because hiring a professional is too expensive, Skylar, you're handy. I was the one who mowed the lawn in the blistering sun while Madison posted TikToks of herself tanning by the pool at her apartment. The breaking point, or at least the beginning of it, was the grand European tour. 2 months ago, Madison announced that she and 4 of her friends were going on a month-long trip through France, Italy, and Greece. "It's a graduation gift to myself," she chirped over dinner. My parents beamed at her like she'd just won a Nobel Prize. "We're so proud of you, honey," Harold said, sliding an envelope across the table. It was a $10,000 check for walking around money. I sat there, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. $10,000? Dad, last week you told me you couldn't help me with my car's transmission repair because the house fund was empty. I've been taking the bus to work for 2 weeks. Susan didn't even look up from her wine. Madison has worked so hard, Skylar. She deserves a break. You're young and healthy. The bus won't kill you. Besides, while she's away, I need you here. I'm planning on restaining the deck and painting the guest rooms. It'll be a good project for you. For the last 2 weeks, while Madison was busy packing designer luggage, I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing floors and prepping the house for the massive bon voyage party they threw for her. I served the drinks. I cleaned the spills. I listened to my mother tell her friends how blessed she was to have such a successful daughter like Madison. No one mentioned me. Not once. I was just the girl in the apron, weaving through the crowd with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. If my parents were the cold, winter wind in that house, my grandmother Eleanor was the fireplace that kept me from freezing. She was my mother's mother, but they were nothing alike. While Susan was obsessed with social status and Madison's potential, Grandma Eleanor was a woman of quiet strength and incredible observation. She moved into the guest suite of our house in 2018, and for 3 years, she sat in her armchair by the window, watching. She saw the way I was sent to the kitchen while Madison was given the spotlight. She saw the way my father, Harold, would praise Madison for barely passing a class while ignoring my Dean's List certificates. One rainy afternoon in 2020, she called me into her room. She took my hands in hers. They were thin and spotted with age, but her grip was like iron. "Skylar," she whispered, her voice gravelly but clear. "Your mother is my daughter, and I love her. But she has a blind spot when it comes to Madison. A massive, dangerous blind spot. And your father, he just follows her lead to keep the peace. I won't let you pay for their mistakes forever." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. I just thought she was being sweet, giving me the emotional support I was starving for. But then, 6 months before she passed away, she did something that would change the trajectory of my life. She handed me a small silver locket. Inside was a tiny, folded-up piece of paper with a phone number and a name, Marcus Thorne. "When you turn 25, she said, looking me dead in the eye, "you call this man, not before, not even if things get bad. Wait until you are 25. Promise me, Skylar." I promised. And when she passed away in 2021, the house felt emptier and colder than ever. At the funeral, Madison made a huge scene, crying loudly for the cameras, while I stood silently, holding Grandma's hand in my mind. No one mentioned a will. My parents took it for granted that the house, the massive 5-bedroom estate at 742 Silver Oak Lane, was theirs. They talked about their equity and their investment. I believed them. I even felt grateful when they let me stay in my childhood room for $800 a month. Then came my 25th birthday. It wasn't a celebration. My parents had forgotten it because they were busy helping Madison move into her 3rd apartment of the year, the one they were paying the deposit for. I sat in my room, pulled out the locket, and called Marcus Thorne. We met in a small wood-paneled office downtown. Marcus was a sharp-eyed attorney who looked like he'd been waiting for my call his entire career. He slid a thick, cream-colored folder across the desk. "Your grandmother, Eleanor, purchased 742 Silver Oak Lane in 1998, he began, his voice calm and professional. "She paid for it in full using the inheritance she received from her own father. It was never your parents' house, Skylar. They never owned a single brick of it." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Then how have they been living there all these years? They told me they took out a mortgage." Marcus shook his head. "They didn't take out a mortgage to buy it. They were granted what's called a life estate. Your grandmother allowed them to live there as long as they were alive, but with very specific conditions. One of those conditions was that they had to maintain the property and pay all taxes and insurance. But more importantly, the trust she established stipulated that the moment you turned 25, the full title and ownership of the property would transfer directly to you. Effective 6 months ago, Skylar, you became the sole owner of 742 Silver Oak Lane." I stared at the deed. Skylar M. Carter. There it was, in black and white, recorded and filed. My grandmother had seen the favoritism. She had seen the golden child syndrome infecting my parents, and she had built a legal fortress to protect me. She knew that if Susan and Harold owned the house, they would eventually sell it or mortgage it to fund Madison's whims, leaving me with nothing. "Do they know?" I asked, my voice shaking. "No," Marcus replied. "Eleanor specifically requested that they not be informed. She wanted to see if they would treat you fairly once you were an adult. She told me, if they know Skylar owns it, they'll guilt her into signing it over to Madison. I want her to have the power to choose when to reveal the truth." I sat in my car outside the law office for an hour, the folder heavy on my passenger seat. A wave of rage washed over me, followed by a strange, cold relief. For years, my parents had been collecting $800 a month from me, rent for a house I owned. They had been acting like they were doing me a favor by letting me stay there, while I was the one essentially paying for their lifestyle. But then Marcus told me the complication. "In 2020, he said, pulling out another document, your parents took out a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, against the property for $85,000. They weren't supposed to be able to do that since they only held a life estate, but the bank at the time relied on old records. They thought your mother was the owner." "Where did the $85,000 go?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The loan application says, educational and business support for daughter, Madison Carter." My parents had stolen $85,000 from the value of my house to fund Madison's failed boutiques and spiritual retreats. And because the house was now legally mine, that debt was technically tied to my property. If the payments weren't made, the bank could eventually foreclose on my inheritance. I had a choice. I could have walked into the house that night and thrown the papers in their faces. I could have stopped the madness right then. But I thought about what Grandma Eleanor said about the long game. I wanted to see exactly how far they would go. I wanted to see if there was any shred of love left for me, or if I was truly just a resource to be mined. Tuesday morning arrived with a crisp, cool air that felt like the beginning of a new life. For weeks, I had been preparing for this day. I was more than just a girl with a 4.0 GPA and a mountain of secret responsibilities. I was a candidate for a senior analyst position at one of the most prestigious firms in Seattle. This wasn't just a job. It was my escape plan. It was the moment the invisible daughter would finally step into the light. I had spent the previous night steaming my only professional suit, the one I'd bought with money I'd saved from skipping lunch for a month. I had my portfolio ready. My research on the company was impeccable, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of genuine hope. I woke up at 5 a.m., long before the sun or my parents were up. I wanted to leave early, to have a quiet moment of reflection before the biggest interview of my life. But as I stepped out onto the driveway, my heart didn't just sink. It stopped. My car, the 2015 sedan I had paid for with my own sweat and tears, was leaning heavily to the left. I walked closer, my breath hitching in my throat. The front driver's side tire wasn't just flat. It had been shredded. 3 distinct, jagged gashes were cut into the sidewall. This wasn't a nail from the road. This was a message. This was a screwdriver used with precision and malice. A shadow moved on the porch. I looked up and saw my father, Harold, standing there with a mug of coffee, his face as cold and unreadable as a stone wall. A few seconds later, my mother, Susan, stepped out behind him, still in her silk bathrobe, the one I had laundered and ironed just 2 days ago. "Oh dear," Susan said, her voice dripping with a fake, sickening sympathy that made my skin crawl. "It looks like you won't be going anywhere today, Skylar. What a shame." I looked from the tire to my father. "Dad, did you do this?" Harold didn't even blink. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "The driveway is private property, Skylar, and as long as you're living under my roof, you need to be available when the family needs you. Your sister, Madison, is halfway across the world. Who's going to handle the grocery delivery today? Who's going to prep the house for the roofers coming this afternoon? You're being selfish, thinking you can just run off to some interview when there's real work to be done here." "Selfish?" My voice came out as a whisper, then grew into a steady, cold flame. "I have a chance to start a career. I have a chance to actually live my life. And you destroyed my property to stop me?" Susan stepped forward, her face twisting into the familiar mask of anger she saved only for me. "Enough with the drama. You're a parasite, Skylar. You've lived here for years, barely contributing, while your sister is out there making something of herself. Madison needs this house to be perfect when she gets back. She needs her family to be a support system, not a collection of bitter losers. You're staying right here. Go inside, change out of that ridiculous suit, and start on the guest wing. It needs a deep clean before the weekend." That was the moment the last thread of my daughterly loyalty snapped. It didn't break with a bang. It dissolved in the realization that they didn't just favor Madison, they actively hated my success. To them, I wasn't a person with dreams. I was a household appliance. I was the dishwasher, the lawnmower, and the ATM they used to pay for Madison's lattes. The bus ride to the city was the longest hour of my life. I sat by the window, watching the suburban sprawl of our neighborhood fade into the distance, replaced by the towering glass and steel of the city. I was shivering, not just from the rain-soaked clothes clinging to my skin, but from the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I had nothing but a suitcase and a folder, yet for the first time in 26 years, I didn't feel like a servant. I felt like a hunter. I checked into a small, nondescript motel near the downtown area. It was a far cry from the 5-bedroom mansion at 742 Silver Oak Lane with its peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of industrial cleaner. But to me, it felt like a palace of freedom. I sat on the edge of the creaky bed and opened the folder Marcus Thorne had given me. I laid the documents out one by one. The original deed from Grandma Eleanor, the trust agreement, and the most important piece, the terms of the life estate. My parents, Susan and Harold, truly believed they were the masters of that house. They had spent decades treating me like an intruder in my own inheritance. But the law is cold, and it doesn't care about favorite children or golden daughters. According to the trust, their right to live in that house was conditional. They were required to pay the property taxes, keep up with the home insurance, and ensure the property didn't fall into waste, a legal term for letting a house rot through neglect. I pulled out my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I'd been keeping for 3 years. Every time a tax bill came and Susan complained about being broke, I had paid it secretly online. Every time the HVAC system died or the roof leaked and Harold looked the other way, I was the one who called the contractors and paid the invoices from my tutoring and waitressing money. I had the receipts. I had the bank statements. I had evidence that for the last 3 years, Susan and Harold had fundamentally breached the terms of their life estate. They weren't just tenants. They were defaulting tenants who were effectively squatting in a house they no longer had a right to inhabit. The next morning, I walked into Marcus Thorne's office. The atmosphere was quiet, smelling of old paper and expensive coffee. Marcus looked at me, then at my suitcase, and then at the cold determination in my eyes. "They did it, didn't they?" he asked, leaning back in his leather chair. "They punctured my tires to stop me from going to a job interview, Marcus. They told me I'm a parasite and that I'm never leaving that house because they need someone to clean it while Madison is in Paris," I said, my voice as sharp as a razor. "I'm done being the invisible daughter. I want them out, every single one of them." Marcus nodded slowly. He pulled a fresh stack of documents from his desk. Under Oregon law, and specifically under the terms of Eleanor's trust, their failure to maintain the financial obligations of the property allows for an immediate termination of the life estate. By paying the taxes and maintenance yourself, you've essentially been subsidizing their breach. But now, that subsidy ends. He started typing, the sound of the keys echoing like a drumbeat. "We are drafting a notice of termination of life estate and notice to vacate. We aren't just asking them to leave, Skylar. We are informing them that their legal right to remain has already expired due to their material breach of the trust conditions. And then there's the matter of the $85,000 HELOC fraud." "I want that reported too," I said. "They took a loan against a property they didn't own to fund Madison's lifestyle. That's bank fraud. That's identity theft." "It's a criminal matter," Marcus agreed. "I'll handle the civil eviction and the property transfer verification. I've already contacted the sheriff's office to schedule a formal service of the papers. They'll get the notice tomorrow." I watched as the printer whirred to life, spitting out the pages that would dismantle my parents' world. I picked up the pen and signed my name at the bottom of the eviction notice. Skylar M. Carter, owner. It felt heavy. It felt right. 2 weeks had passed since I walked down that driveway in the rain. 2 weeks of living in a cramped motel, eating microwave meals, and working my new job in Seattle. Yes, I got the job. I had done the interview over Zoom from the motel, and the firm was so impressed, they offered me a signing bonus that covered my legal fees. But while my new life was starting, the old one at 742 Silver Oak Lane was about to end in a way my parents could never have imagined. I chose Friday evening for my return. It was the night Madison was coming back from her exhausting luxury tour of Europe. I knew Susan would be throwing a welcome home dinner. I knew the house would be filled with their high society friends, the kind of people Susan loved to impress with her perfect family image. I pulled into the driveway at 6:30 p.m. My car had 4 brand new tires, paid for by the signing bonus of the job they tried to make me lose. Beside me sat Marcus Thorne, holding a thick, black briefcase. Behind us, a local sheriff's cruiser pulled in, its lights off, but its presence unmistakable. As I walked toward the front door, I could hear the sounds of laughter and the clinking of wine glasses coming from inside. I didn't knock. I used my key, the key they had demanded I return, but which I had forgotten to leave on the counter. The moment I stepped into the foyer, the laughter died. Susan was standing by the grand staircase, wearing a silk dress that cost more than my monthly rent, holding a glass of champagne. Madison was next to her, tanned and glowing, surrounded by shopping bags from Gucci and Prada. Harold was at the bar, regaling a group of neighbors with stories of Madison's cultural enlightenment in Italy. "Skylar?" Susan's voice was like a whip. "What on earth are you doing here? And who are these people? I told you that you were no longer welcome in this house after the stunt you pulled, leaving us without help when we needed it most." "I'm not here to help you, Susan," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And I'm not here as a guest." Harold stepped forward, his face reddening. "Get out, Skylar, now, before I have you removed for trespassing. You're a burden we've already shed. Don't make this ugly in front of our friends." Marcus Thorne stepped forward, opening his briefcase. "Actually, Mr. Carter, the only person trespassing here is you." A ripple of confused whispers went through the room. Susan laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "This is ridiculous. This is our home. We've lived here for 20 years. We have the mortgage to prove it." "No," Marcus said, pulling out a certified copy of the property deed. "You have a life estate, which was granted to you by Eleanor Carter, but that estate came with conditions. Conditions you have materially breached." Marcus turned to the gathered neighbors and friends. "For those of you who don't know, this house was never owned by Harold and Susan. It was owned by Eleanor Carter, who left it in an irrevocable trust for her granddaughter, Skylar. Effective 6 months ago, on her 25th birthday, the full title transferred to her. Skylar is the sole legal owner of 742 Silver Oak Lane." The room went dead silent. Madison's Gucci bag slipped from her hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Susan's face went from pale to a ghastly shade of gray. "That's a lie!" Susan shrieked, her voice cracking. "My mother would never do that. She loved us. She knew we needed this house." "She loved Skylar," I countered, stepping closer. "She saw how you treated me. She saw you take out an $85,000 home equity loan against a property you didn't own to fund Madison's lifestyle. That, Harold, is called bank fraud. And since I'm the one who has been secretly paying back that loan for the last year to keep my house out of foreclosure, I think I have a lot to say about it." Harold's eyes darted toward the sheriff standing in the doorway. The neighbors began to back away, some looking at their phones, others whispering behind their hands. The perfect family image was shattering in real time, right in front of the audience Susan valued most. "You've been collecting $800 a month in rent from me," I continued, "for a house I already owned. You called me a parasite and a servant, while I was the one paying the property taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance that you were legally required to cover. You used me as an ATM and a maid, and then you had the audacity to puncture my tires because you were afraid your free labor was walking out the door. Skylar, honey, let's talk about this privately," Susan pleaded, her voice dropping an octave as she realized her social standing was evaporating. "We're family. We can work this out." "Family?" I asked. "Family doesn't sabotage their daughter's future. Family doesn't steal $85,000 from an inheritance. Family doesn't leave their child in the rain with a flat tire and a suitcase." I turned to Marcus, who handed me a set of legal envelopes. I walked over to Harold and Susan and pressed the papers into their shaking hands. "This is an official notice to vacate," I said, my voice echoing through the foyer. "Your life estate is being terminated due to fraud and breach of contract. You have 30 days to pack every single thing that belongs to you and leave. If you aren't out by the 31st, the sheriff will be back to physically remove you." Madison started to cry. "But where will I go? I just got back. I don't have a job." I looked at my sister, the girl who had spent $10,000 of my money on Italian leather and French wine while I was donating plasma to pay the light bill. "Maybe you should have studied harder, Madison. Or maybe you can use some of those designer bags to carry your things to whatever studio apartment you can afford." It's been 6 months since that night at 742 Silver Oak Lane. Susan and Harold now live in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, finally forced to live within the actual means they have. Madison is working a retail job she hates, learning the hard way that potential doesn't pay the bills when there's no one left to exploit. I moved back into my house, but I didn't just move in. I reclaimed it. I ripped up the carpets I once scrubbed on my knees and repainted every room in colors I chose, not the ones Susan dictated. I started my career in Seattle, and every morning I drink my coffee on the porch where they once tried to break me. I don't feel bitter anymore. I just feel light. Grandma Eleanor's final gift wasn't just a house, it was the power to say no more. If you're being treated like a servant by people who claim to love you, remember this. Your worth is not a transaction, and your silence is not a requirement. I stopped being their foundation, and I finally started building my own. My name is Skylar, and for the first time in my life, I am finally home.